Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout 3, where today we're going to be taking a look at some point lookout weapons. This time we're going to be taking a look at the shovel, its unique variant, the axe, and its unique variant. All of these you can get in the DLC, and that's actually the only place where they show up. So if you're going to need to repair them, you're probably going to have to run back to the DLC to get them. Luckily, these weapons are very cheap compared to some of the other weapons that you can find in Point Lookout, as well as basically every enemy there can have them. The locals, the hillbillies have these weapons, as well as the tribals have them too. So let's talk about the shovel first, and then we'll go over the rest of these. So the shovel is kind of the weakest of these weapons, but it's still actually pretty good. For stats, this one does 12 damage per hit, which is fine for a melee weapon. This one has 17 damage per second. This one attacks fairly quick, but not super quick. It is a two-handed melee weapon. This one does have a 3 times crit modifier though. So it is very likely to hit crits, which certainly helps it because it actually has much higher crit damage than it has regular damage at 20, which is pretty good. You do hit crits pretty often with this, and it can do a lot of damage. This one also costs 20 action points to be using in VATS, so not a whole lot. It's kind of on par with a lot of melee weapons, or a little bit lower than most melee weapons. This one weighs 3 weight, and this one has 500 swings in it before it breaks. So the shovel is quite durable too. It also has a pretty good sound effect when you're actually hitting things with it, so I do like that. That is something to add on to the shovel. For the general pros of the shovel and the axe, these ones both do good damage and good damage per second. They are fairly solid weapons just all the way around. The only major cons with these weapons is something I brought up at the start of this, where they are DLC weapons. You are going to need to go to Point Lookout and get them at least first, and then you're also going to potentially need to go there to fix them up. You can fix them up with alien epoxy. I don't know if that's really worth it. And you could also fix them up by just talking to traders and having them fix them. So it can be a little bit annoying, but not the worst thing in the world. For an overall rating for the shovel itself, I think I'd put this one into B tier. It's pretty solid. It works really well. If you want to rush Point Lookout early on, you're pretty much guaranteed to grab these or the axes early on. Even if you don't plan on doing any of the quests there, even if you just want to go search around the town, you're going to be able to find shovels and axes around it. So it could be a really worthwhile endeavor if you are going with a melee build. The unique version of this is called the Fertilizing Shovel, and you get this one from talking to one of the tribals after you completed part of the main quest. This one you have to talk to and pass a speech check, and then you get the shovel. And this shovel's actually pretty decent. It's probably the best of the poison weapons, which there's not a whole lot of in Fallout 3, but this one kind of is better just because of its stats. So this one does 15 damage on hit, slightly more than the regular shovel. However, this one does 4 damage of poison damage over the course of 10 seconds. So you can actually rack up the DPS fairly high with this, especially if you hit things multiple times. It's better than something like the ant sting that we talked about, the unique poison knife. This one just has higher base damage and it has longer reach too, so that's kind of good. This one does 25 damage per second. That's not counting the poison damage over time because the actual damage per second could be potentially higher than this, depending on how much poison you end up stacking on an enemy. This one still has a 3 times crit modifier, which is really good. This one actually has really good crit damage at 30 damage a hit, so that's very nice. This costs 20 action points, still weighs 3, and this one has slightly more item HP than the regular shovel. This one can hit 533 times before it breaks. Not a substantial amount more than the regular shovel. You could argue that the health goes further on this. If you're more patient, you're willing to wait for the poison to take down on enemies. I still don't think it's one of the best melee weapons, which is why I'm going to put this high up into A tier, but it is still a very solid weapon. If you want to run around with a shovel, it's actually a pretty decent weapon. It's surprisingly good in both this and in Fallout New Vegas. You wouldn't really think like a shovel would be a fantastic weapon, but in Fallout New Vegas particularly, it's like a top tier weapon for the early game for melee. Assuming that you're not rushing particular melee weapons like Chance's knife. Let's move on to the axe next. So the axe is also carried by the locals. It can be found all over the place throughout Point Lookout. And this one is also pretty solid in terms of stats. So the axe does 20 damage per hit, which is really good. 29 damage per second. Also fine for a two-handed weapon. Has a 2 times crit modifier, so it is still more likely to hit crits. This one, again, does more crit damage than it does regular damage, doing 30, which is very good. Costs 30 action points. The axes aren't as good in VATS as something like the shovels were, but they're still decent enough. This one weighs 6 weight, so kind of heavy, and the axe has the same item health as the shovel, so it has 500 hits in it before it breaks. This one, I would just say, is an upgrade over the shovel most of the time. The shovel can technically hit more crits, but since they hit about at the same rate, the weight is fairly similar. I guess the action point cost is a little bit less, and they're pretty similar to one another. I just think the axe is stronger overall. You're going to generally get more damage, especially if you're not going to the crit build. Then the axe is going to beat the shovel most of the time. So the axe, I think I'd put it a tier higher than the shovel, put it up into A tier. I'm not sure if it's as good as the Fertilizing Shovel, because that one has the damage over time, and if you're into that playstyle, then that one could be one of the better weapons. And then we have the unique version of the axe, which is called the Dismemberer. This one you get as a reward after completing a quest, Plink Safari. So you have to go to Plink Safari, which is actually another place where you can get the Ghoul Ecology perk, which is a really good one. That one actually just gives you +5 base damage for everything. It's supposed to only give you 5% more damage towards ghouls. That's not how it works. It's actually bugged. So you can do that, and then you can also enter the Safari, assuming you got enough caps. And then if you manage to survive against all the ghouls, which hopefully you would, then you get this as a reward. And the Dismember is kind of a unique weapon. So for stats, the Dismember does 25 damage per hit, which is the highest that we have so far. This one does 36 damage per second, which is also pretty respectable. Has a 2x crit modifier, does 40 crit damage, so its crits are very good. Still costs 30 action points, weighs 6, and then this one has 480 hits in it before it breaks, so slightly less item HP than the regular axe, but not by too much. This one also has its own unique effect of basically giving you bloody mess on the weapon itself. So anytime that you kill an enemy with this, there's a very high chance that it gets dismembered and just kind of ripped apart, which can be kind of fun. It's kind of cool that the Dismemberer does that. If you already have Bloody Mess, then this one, I guess, will trigger it more often, since Bloody Mess is also a % chance of triggering. But yeah, that's kind of cool that you get that addition to it. I don't think that addition alone makes it way crazy, but the Dismember is probably one of the better melee weapons throughout the game. So I'm going to put this one into low S tier. I was debating between low S tier or high A tier for this one. Same thing goes with the Fertilizing Shovel, but I do find myself liking this one more often in a melee build. So that's kind of my feeling on it. Tell me your guys' feeling on the shovel and the axe and both the unique variants of them. I feel like both of them are pretty good and both of them are pretty solid, and if you want to run there right away, they're good options for melee weapons. So actually pretty good options there for melee. Tell me your thoughts. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye everybody.